Oleksandr Usyk is most likely the best boxer in the world at the moment, one of the best boxers of this generation, and one of the best boxers of all time. He's beaten and cleared out the best of the best in 2 weight divisions, and for that reason he's got one of the best resumes in boxing. So in order to figure out just how good his resume is, like I've done for several other boxers on this channel, I'm going to place every single opponent on his record into a category, based on several factors which lead to the quality of his opponents, and then ultimately we'll get a score at the end. Oleksandr Usyk first of all had a stellar amateur career. Before turning professional he won a gold in the 2012 Olympics, beating Artur Beterbiev in the quarterfinal and then Clement Rousseau in the final. Based on this, he was a highly regarded prospect, and like everyone who turns professional for the first time, he takes on a deal-level opponent in his first fight. He knocks out 16-7 Felipe Romero to win his professional debut, before beating 6 more D-level opponents, until he was 8-0 and faced his first notable opponent on his record, 19-4 Johnny Muller. Johnny Muller had 2 very good wins on his record by this point, Kevin Lerena and Mateusz Masternak. He beat a young 11-0 Lerena by decision, Masternak being someone who never really won a world title, but gave really tough fights to 3 world champions, Tony Bellew, Uniel Dorticos and most recently Chris Billam-Smith. However, it was a split decision in Johnny Muller's home crowd, so you can infer that it was a robbery, but nevertheless those are 2 legitimate names on his record. Usyk would stop Muller in 3 rounds, and I think Muller is a B-tier opponent. Usyk then beats a D-tier Pedro Julio Rodriguez, before finally getting his first world title shot versus Krzysztof Głowacki. By 2016, Poland's Krzysztof Głowacki was the reigning and defending WBO Cruiserweight champion. He was 26-0 and his reign began the previous year when he dethroned Marco Huck by knockout, then defended again versus former champion Steve Cunningham. Głowacki was coming off 2 serious world-class wins, but Usyk would ultimately win in front of Głowacki's home country in Poland by unanimous decision. Because Głowacki was legitimately one of the best in the division at the time, I think I'm going to put him as an A+ win. Then Usyk defends his world title for the first time versus Tabiso Machinu. Machinu was never world champion but came very close, had 2 very close fights versus champion Ilunga Makabu, defeated Johnny Muller and most notably beat Denis Lebedev. Usyk would ultimately break down and stop Machinu. Machinu was always on the verge of being championship material but not quite. I'm going to put Machinu in B+. Usyk then defends for the second time versus Michael Hunter. Hunter was 12-0 at the time and didn't really do anything before the Usyk fight, but it's the work he did afterwards at heavyweight that stands out about Hunter. Gave Martin Bakole the first loss of his career back in 2018, beat the amateur standout Sergey Kuzmin, weirdly enough defeated former UFC fighter Fabio Maldonado, went to a draw versus Alexander Povetkin, but to this day Usyk is still the only guy to actually beat him, but realistically that's because he never actually fought for a title again. Similar to Machinu, he's always been a guy who's been close to the championship level, but not quite. I'm going to put Hunter in B+. Usyk then begins the World Boxing Super Series versus Marco Huck. Huck did lose a few times by that point, but he did have the tied most title defences in Cruiserweight history at 13. He briefly tried his luck at heavyweight versus Povetkin, but failed, so moved back down, defended a few more times, before being dethroned by Głowacki. Usyk would batter Marco Huck and stop him. I think because of the title reign and how competitive Marco Huck was for such a long time, I'm going to put Huck as an A-tier win. Then Usyk attempts to unify the titles in the semi-final versus Mairis Briedis. Mairis Briedis was the 23-0 WBC champion at the time, and I think I really need to explain just how good Mairis Briedis was. He won his world title the previous year by beating the previously mentioned Marco Huck by decision. Then in the quarterfinals of the World Boxing Super Series he took on Cuba's Mike Perez, winning the fight by decision. Then following the Usyk fight he re-entered the World Boxing Super Series as they did a second tournament and he beat Noel Gevor-Mikhailian, the same guy who knocked out Ilunga Makabu in 2 rounds and should be a current world champion after his fight versus Badu Jack. Then knocked out Krzysztof Głowacki, a previous A+ tier win, beats Uniel Dorticos in the final. Then finally his reign ends at the hands of Jai Opetaia. Opetaia being a current pound for pound talent and someone who had to go through absolute hell twice to beat Briedis. And if that's not convincing enough, he's still the one who gave Usyk his closest fight in his career so far to this day. I think Briedis deserves the rare distinction of an S-tier win. He's the second best cruiserweight of the entire decade, second only to Usyk, and one of the greats in that division. Then in the final, Usyk takes on Murat Gassiev. Gassiev was 26-0 at the time and considered one of the best punchers in the entire sport. He won his world title in 2016 by beating Denis Lebedev, knocked out Krzysztof Wlodarczyk in the quarterfinal, and most notably by far put on an absolutely wonderful performance over Yuniel Dorticos to win the semi-final. Keeping in mind Yuniel Dorticos is a fellow undefeated champion with absolute bazookas in his fists, and Gassiev outboxed him beautifully. Look at the accuracy, the speed, the torque he puts into his punches. A prime Murat Gassiev is one of the most dangerous cruiserweights the division has ever seen. He had outboxed Dorticos for the most part for 12 rounds before finally getting the knockout in round 12. After such a good performance, the odds versus Usyk himself in the final were very close. People were split on who they thought would win, but ultimately Usyk would outbox Gassiev for 12 rounds in a beautiful performance, showing just how far Usyk was above the rest of the division. That fight won Usyk the tournament and made him the undisputed champion at Cruiserweight. Unfortunately though, Gassiev's career sort of fizzled out afterwards, as he made a move up to heavyweight and ultimately lost to Otto Wallin. But in his prime Cruiserweight days, Gassiev was an absolute machine, and I think because of the form he was on by that point, I'm going to put Gassiev as an A++ win. Usyk then takes on his final opponent in the Cruiserweight division, Tony Bellew. Bellew was coming off 2 wins over an injured David Haye. Before that, knocked out Ilunga Makabu to win the world title. Before that, beat Mateusz Masternak. The last time he lost was way back 5 years ago when he faced Adonis Stevenson, who was on a ridiculous streak by that point. Usyk would ultimately break down and stop Tony Bellew. I think because Bellew was still on pretty decent form by this point, I'm going to put Tony Bellew as an A tier win. Usyk then finally makes the move up to heavyweight to take on Chaz Witherspoon. Witherspoon was quite unspectacular but not quite a journeyman. I'm going to put Witherspoon in the C tier. Usyk then takes on his first heavyweight test in Derek Chisora. One thing I always take into consideration when it comes to these resume tier lists is you need to take the weight difference into consideration. Chisora is a massive heavyweight and a nightmare opponent, who's been in there with some of the best names in all of boxing: Tyson Fury 3 times, Vitaly Klitschko, David Haye, went to war versus Dillian Whyte twice, gave Ajit Kabayel a decent run for his money back in 2019, almost beat Joseph Parker in their first fight, and really did try to push Usyk to his limits in their fight. I think in a normal heavyweight situation Chisora would be B+, but considering that Usyk hadn't clearly filled out for heavyweight by this point, and how rough of a task Chisora is for your second fight at heavyweight, I'm going to bump Chisora from a B+ to an A tier win. Then Usyk takes on Anthony Joshua. I think there's been a bit of revisionist history when it comes to Anthony Joshua. Anthony Joshua for a time was the next best thing in the heavyweight division, a unified champion, gold medalist, had the best resume in the heavyweight division by this point. Not to mention as an opponent for someone moving up from Cruiserweight. 6'6", pure muscle, 245 pounds. A well-rounded technical boxer with knockout power. He did lose to Andy Ruiz but did prove it was a bit of a one-off to an extent. And Joshua did look in really good form in his most recent fight versus Kubrat Pulev. An excellent balance of patience and aggression, but Usyk comes in there clearly undersized and outboxes Joshua for 12 rounds. And I think personally this is the best performance of Usyk's career. Keeping in mind Usyk is always taking these big fights in enemy territory, Głowacki in Poland, Briedis in Latvia, Joshua in the UK. This fight made Usyk the unified heavyweight champion. I think similar to Chisora, I've got to bump AJ 1 spot in the tier list, just like I did in the Pacquiao tier list. I think normally in this situation Joshua would be an A++ win. I wouldn't say S tier because he wasn't unbeatable, but because Usyk is the smaller man in this fight facing the unified champion, I'm going to put Joshua as an S tier win once again. Then Usyk rematches Joshua. I actually think the version of Joshua that showed up for this fight is the best version of Joshua we've ever seen. He did all the right things in this fight, he imposed his size, he was boxing well. Usyk was simply too good and he won the fight. This is once again, in my opinion, an S tier win, making it 3 now on Usyk's resume. Then Usyk takes on Daniel Dubois for the first time. I'm going to put Dubois in the same spot in both fights simply because I see him as the same fighter in both instances. He's a ridiculous athlete, murderous power, he's fearless and he doesn't slow down. Head to head, he's a really dangerous opponent for anyone. Because of his recent loss to Usyk, I don't want people forgetting about the run of fights he was on before that fight. He stops 2 legitimate undefeated contenders in a row. The first of which being Jarrell Miller in a great performance, then Filip Hrgović, another great performance, then completely demolishes Anthony Joshua in 5 rounds. Usyk stops him in both instances. It's easy to downplay Dubois as just a big, brainless puncher, but those 3 wins he had are very legitimate, and he actually was a defending champion when he fought Usyk the second time. And I think we're going to see Dubois destroy a lot of people after the Usyk loss. I think because of how dangerous Dubois is as an opponent's head-to-head, I'm going to put him as an A+ win. Especially for a guy like Usyk who once again is not a natural heavyweight. Then Usyk takes on the biggest of the heavyweights, Tyson Fury. Fury was the lineal heavyweight champion dethroning Vladimir Klitschko for the first time in 10 years. Dethrones 42-0 Deontay Wilder, beats him 3 times. One thing I will say about Tyson Fury is he was quite inconsistent. There were fights where he simply didn't show up properly. But I think versus Usyk himself, he absolutely did show up. I think movement-wise, offensively and defensively, Fury looks really, really good in that first fight. In fact, I'd argue the best he's looked in his entire career. A lot of people may point to the second Wilder fight or the Klitschko fight. I don't think Fury looks all that good offensively versus Klitschko. And I think versus Wilder that was simply bound to happen when Wilder fights someone of that level who does that to him. I think Fury looked his best versus Usyk, and that still wasn't enough. Usyk had some rough mid-rounds, but ultimately landed that big punch in round 9. Doesn't finish him, but maybe should have done. Sends him down, gets the 10-8 round. Then outboxes him in the last few rounds to win the split decision, which ultimately made Usyk the undisputed 2-division champion in boxing. Once again, I wouldn't really consider Fury an S-tier win normally, but once again we do need to consider the size difference is a factor. The same idea applies to Pacquiao, Mayweather, any boxer who does move up several divisions. Usyk did not have to move up to heavyweight, he could have stayed at cruiserweight, he was not forced to move up. I don't think physically he's at his best at heavyweight, he's just performing as well as he has because he's as good as he is. Joshua and Fury can only physically be heavyweights, and we have to give Usyk extra credit for beating them for that reason. Once again, Fury in both fights is going to be an S-tier win, making it 5 S-tier wins so far. Then Usyk fights Dubois again and knocks him out. I've explained this before, it's an A+ win. Now before we go to the overview, I received a comment on a recent video suggesting a point system for each resume, and I think that's a great idea. Well done Gregorio Buenagua, 1, 2, 3, 5. So now from this point onwards, an S-tier win is 10 points, an A++ win is 8 points, A+ is 6 points, A tier is 4 points, B+ is 3, B is 2, C is 1, and you get no points for beating journeyman. Usyk doesn't have a loss, so I can't show how it would subtract. To be honest, I don't like the idea of subtracting losses from someone's record. I think a resume should focus on their achievements rather than their shortcomings. So in terms of Usyk's achievements, he's got 5 S-tier wins, which is the same as Pacquiao's. 1 A++ win, Murat Gassiev. 2 A+ wins, Daniel Dubois twice. A tier, Gwavashki, Marco Huck, Tony Bellew, Derek Chisora. B+, Machinu, Michael Hunter. B tier, Johnny Mueller. C tier, Chaz Witherspoon. And D tier, all the journeymen he fought when he first turned pro. So that gives Usyk a total score of 95. I can't be bothered to count the scores for the other resumes like Tank Davis, Lomachenko, Canelo, Inoue. But if someone could count them up, that'd be useful. So to overview his accomplishments, he's won 13 title fights, 2-division champion, 2 times undisputed, won 8 world titles. Unlike most people in these videos, most people who he fought who were champions during the fight. The only champions who weren't title holders during the fight were Tony Bellew and Marco Huck. So to overview Usyk's resume, I think he's definitely got the best strength of schedule in boxing. Canelo may have a deeper resume because he's been fighting for a lot longer, but since 2016 Usyk's been facing straight killers non-stop, with the exception of Chaz Witherspoon in his tune-up fight. It's between him and Canelo really. If he adds Parker, Caballel, Itama to the list, he may overtake him. Anyway, that's going to do it for the video. Like and subscribe, leave a comment. Goodbye.